Hello, welcome to Toffee TV. Today I am joined by Jack Holmes, who is a magazine editor turned sports writer, hosts the Football Weekend podcast. And I'm going to be speaking to him because obviously we're all well aware that our days at Goodison Park are numbered. We've only, at time of recording, got 2 home games left to play there in our illustrious stadium before we move off to Bramley Moor Dock. And the reason why I'm speaking to Jack, who is an Arsenal fan, I'm just going to put it out there immediately, just for everyone. The reason why I'm speaking to Jack is he actually got to experience Goodison Park earlier this year before writing a tremendous piece before the Merseyside derby. So, Jack, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here, and it was lovely to be at Goodison Park in January, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, it's a pleasure.
So before we kick off, you want to tell me a little bit about your Football Weekend podcast? You know, magazine editor turned sports writer. Can you give me a little bit of background there?
So I started out as an editor at Esquire magazine and here in New York and rose up the ranks there, mostly covering politics. So thank God I'm in a new business these days. But I did sneak in some football stories there. It's funny, growing up in the U.S., especially back then, I was a bit outnumbered in terms of sports fandom. So this opportunity comes across my desk to interview Pele. He's in town promoting a movie, and I met him in a Midtown hotel room as a 24-year-old and interviewed him because nobody else really cared that much.
Wow.
So I got lucky in that regard where I got these opportunities. I went to the World Cup in 2022 and did a story on the U.S. men's team before that. But the football stories were few and far between when I was a magazine editor. So when I sort of created my own opportunity to cover the game more regularly with the Football Weekend. So it's a Friday morning newsletter, which has a bunch of stuff in it, but the main thing is up top. We have the Friday morning podcast where we preview the biggest match from the coming weekend from around world football. I try and change it up and not go full England because I think Americans are nearly as Premier League centric as the English are. So this week we'll go down to the Basque Country for that derby as an example. But yeah, I'm chuffed to be able to cover the game more regularly. I've been a fanatic since 2006.
Outstanding. Not a bad introduction as well, Pele. There as an interview, it's not bad. That's not bad one to have in your pocket. So how did this trip to Goodison Park come about then?
So I will be transparent that one of my best friends from college, university, is a devout Liverpool fan and was determined to go to Anfield for a European night. But I said to him, I'm more interested in going to Goodison because it's about to close. And it's one of the last, as John Champion, a commentator, said on the Football Weekend podcast last season, it's one of the last grand old stadiums in England. It's Archibald Leach, for the most part, except for the redesigned stands. And you can feel the history there, and that those grounds are disappearing left and right, as I'm sure we'll touch on. So we ended up doing both. We found a Sunday Everton match and a Tuesday Liverpool Champions League night against Lille, and we did both. And I wrote little stories on both of them to compare and contrast the blue and the red.
How did you find Goodison then? Because obviously, we were just chatting before we come on, you're an Arsenal fan, being to the Emirates, which is a lovely new stadium, but we can talk about that in a bit. But how did you find Goodison Park and all of its quirks?
I found it extremely charming, and I think it's rooted in part, it has to do with going to the Emirates, which we can touch on, but it's also here in New York. I've always been a Yankee fan since I was 2. And they knocked down the old Yankee Stadium where Babe Ruth played, where Mickey Mantle nearly hit it out of the stadium, where you could feel the history in the girders like you can at Goodison Park, as I soon found out. And the new Yankee Stadium, somewhat like the Emirates, is very shiny, very nice, lots of corporate boxes and good food. New York has its food that we can serve up. But it's not the same. You do give something up. And that was the story that I wanted to tell about Goodison, that as much as everybody I spoke to is well aware that Everton must go, they must move if they want to do the things that they want to do in this brave new world of football, you do lose something. And that was my interest going into it. And I wasn't disappointed when I was peeking my head around a royal blue pillar in the Goodison Street, trying to see what exactly had just happened.
Yeah, it is. There is. They will be missed having to, crank your head around some of the posts. Some people might miss them. I'm okay where I am, but yeah, our ground has been littered with them. But it is, of course, an old stadium. I mean, obviously, we'll get onto the game and stuff and everything else you witnessed, but being around Goodison, the church, St. Luke's Church in the corner, obviously the Winslow, these bits were in your article as well, but you got to visit both of them. Not many grounds have a church in the corner of them, which is obviously quite unique for Everton. But having gone in both of those, what did you find about this sort of the ambience of Goodison, which isn't at every ground, shall we say?
You could definitely feel that, and this is true of most fandoms, but it's been handed down from generation to generation. Rob Sawyer, I met there and in the St. Luke's Church, and he was talking about how his grandfather had sat in the Bullens, his father sat in the Bullens, now he does. Although when he was younger, he sat in the Goodison Street, I think, in his younger days. But you could feel that tradition, legacy, heritage, history. And it was literally told by Richie Gillum, the secretary of the Everton Heritage Society, talking about how they had played baseball games there and they had staged World Cup semifinal there. And, Eusebio scored 4 goals in a match at Goodison Park. And so the church felt like a sort of communion for people, not to belabor the metaphor, of people that really wanted to almost pay their respects to this grand old club and this stadium. And there were people there from all over the world. I mean, I heard somebody from Australia was there when I was there. So I really, really enjoyed speaking to people there who are just so passionate about the history of this club, which I've always known as one of the big clubs in England because I came of age, as I said, in the 2000s when it was the first David Moyes era. Everton were a perennial top 6. They were in and around the top 6, we'll say, maybe not every single year. And that tradition is alive and well, I think, even if the results haven't always been there in recent years, among the people at that church and in and around the stadium, that this is a club that beat Bayern Munich in the European competition. I'm blanking on it. The
Cup Winners' Cup, yeah.
Cup Winners' Cup, yes. A famous night at this very stadium as well, that some people were there for, that talked to me about it. So it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Listen, it's becoming real. We've discussed it on the show all season, but I can only speak for myself. Early on in the season, it just felt a million miles away, so it couldn't really be discussed with any sort of emotion. And Everton were doing really poorly as well, obviously, which makes it worse. So you can't focus on anything other than results. But now, because it's all, we're safe and everything else, the attention has turned back to Goodison Park. And I was just sat there in my seat the last home game thinking there's a couple more of these to go and that's it from, this view and this place. And it felt weird. It did feel weird. I don't say my eyes filled up or whatever, anything like that, but it just felt a weird reality of everything that's been done in this ground. Players who've played there, Eusebio, Pele. I was there in the 80s. I was as a kid. The Bayern Munich game, seeing Everton win league titles there. To, FA Cup side in the 90s, seeing Ronaldo, the real Ronaldo, playing at Goodison. Roberto Carlos, as Brazil beat Japan there at the mid-90s. And it's just seeing such, you mentioned David Moyes' first there, at the emergence of Wayne Rooney and every other fantastic player that's played from the opposition, your Cristiano Ronaldo's and Zlatan Ibrahimovic's to Kevin De Bruyne, all of these names and players who've played on that pitch that I've seen in front of my eyes. And it's a weird feeling to think that in a couple more games, that's it. We don't go there anymore. We go to a albeit looks incredible. Shiny new stadium. I think the way football is, you have to do that. You have to move on. But Goodison Park is an unbelievable place. And again, to attract the likes of yourself to want to go there before it goes is I don't think it's not been lost on me how many people I've spoken to who aren't Evertonians, and some who are, who have said, I really wanted to go before the season ends and haven't been able to go there. But I'm really interested in that Spurs game because obviously, as an Arsenal fan, I'm guessing you were an Evertonian for the day when you were in that ground as well, in that Gladys Street end.
I certainly was. It was very enjoyable. You could feel the Ange Postecoglou meltdown coming soon after the match, even in the Gladys Street where I was watching. It was immensely enjoyable. And honestly, Everton is one of those clubs where I've never had too much animosity towards them. I've always maybe even had a bit of a soft spot. So I was happy to be an Evertonian on the day. My friend had to just, pocket all of his allegiances standing next to me.
Suck it off a little bit.
But it was quite a bit of fun. And listen, it's better to be an Evertonian these days than a fan of Tottenham Hotspur, unless, of course, they can pull out a miraculous European result.
Yeah, definitely. What was it like being in the Gladys Street that day then? Because obviously there's a phrase that is used, but I think it was invented by Evertonians and is limbs. And that day against Spurs, Everton had struggled to score goals and were 3 up at half time and could have got a lot more before we tried to Everton it up near the end and let Spurs back into it. But what was it like being behind the goal, being in the street end when Everton obviously scored 3 goals and we were in sort of dreamland because we hadn't seen our team attack and score goals as many as that in the first half in many other games for a while, it seems.
You could feel the release, I would say, and the sound was so loud, bouncing off these ancient girders and the concrete, and the songs after each goal were so loud. But I think that was borne up in what you referred to, that there had been such trouble scoring goals and going forward in general, not creating enough, and to see the team flowing forward, Iliman and Diaye crossing up everybody. Dominic Calvert-Lewin also scored a great goal.
He did score to open the
scoring that day. It was a magical experience, but I will say I was standing next to a guy who I was, as a journalist reporter, I'm, probing this guy for what's going on. He's like, "You're lucky you came today." I can tell you that, because the atmosphere is not always so ebullient as it was that day. But it was a privilege to be there. There's a sound, as you well know, in a proper English football ground that you just simply do not find in an American arena of any kind. Yeah. And that was a prime example.
I was just going to ask you that. Obviously, I mentioned the Emirates before, which is a fantastic stadium, but a very different stadium to what Highbury was. Highbury was more akin with Goodison Park all those years ago. Went there quite a few times. And Arsenal have got this new stadium, and I think only since Mikel Arteta's come in that they've started to regenerate an atmosphere in that took them a long time. But obviously with American stadiums as well, been to a few of them as well, and they are fantastic, but again, very different to Goodison Park. So what's the contrast like for you, either as a journalist or just as a fan, when you're in a stadium like Goodison and you're in a stadium, either the Emirates or the US stadiums that you've been in yourself?
I mean, the simplest way to say it is that American sports have a more corporate atmosphere, and there's a more organic grassroots atmosphere at a Goodison Park, or even, as you say, at the Emirates now, where they've built a new tradition, I would say, in the new ground.
Yeah.
I just think major American sports leagues are just organized very differently. It's much more geared around, the single billionaire ownership model, especially the NFL. And there are very, very committed fans, which I shouldn't, gloss over. Philadelphia Eagles fans, they basically burn down the city of Philadelphia when they win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But it is different. And I don't know if it's just how long these English clubs have been around, how many decades there have been to build these traditions. But I do think there will be some rebuilding or building of new traditions when Everton move, because the Winslow won't be there. And I felt the warmth rush over me as I walked into the Winslow on a January day when it's nippy and in the street, and my friend's glasses fogged up, and you go get a pint. That's the way that you go to the football. And I've heard from opposition fans, like you mentioned earlier, I've heard from opposition fans about the Emirates that they miss going to Highbury because they could feel everything that went into that. And I never had the privilege to be there, but you certainly know that at the Emirates, Arsenal, I think, have struggled because they had to build a whole new tradition there. Yeah. And it's only just now that it feels like it's happening.
Definitely. I mean, you got to also in your article, you got to go down and have a look at where our new home is. You also visited the Bramley-Moore pub as well, I think it's in your article. So what were your sort of impressions of where Everton are moving to, and obviously the area around it?
The stadium is beautiful. I only got up to the gate because I didn't arrange anything, but it looks absolutely gorgeous. And all the photos from inside, it seems state of the art. It's everything that the club really needs. It's interesting looking at the surrounding area because it's a great opportunity for regeneration for the city of Liverpool. That, as you say, the Bramley-Moore, the pub that we went to, it was amazing speaking to them because they were like, we're just a regular place for working people that are around here, and now our whole lives are going to be transformed by this. And I think that'll be true of the whole area. Yeah. On the flip side, the Winslow, the owner said that their business is going to drop 70 to 80%. So the places in and around Goodison will suffer, but it is an opportunity for a new chapter for the Bramley-Moore dock area. I do worry a bit about the transportation infrastructure around there. I think that will be a challenge. Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's a great story, and it's just so Liverpool, the docks having been the cornerstone of the city as a shipping hub, getting a new chance at life here. It's a compelling narrative, at least to me as a journalist,
And obviously Everton have got American owners, US owners, the Friedkin Group, and they are, we'll come on to, I know you've just done a piece on Roma as well, I think, or you've been doing a bit on Roma, so we'll finish with that in a minute. But just knowing sort of what American owners can be like and what the Friedkins are like, and then looking at that area, there's a lot of talk that they're going to actually buy the dock next to it called Nelson Dock for redevelopment, and some other areas around that area you were in yourself, and create an almost Everton village, if you like, or a blue village, which is be hugely exciting. But obviously, like you just said, fantastic for the regeneration of that area as well, because as you've seen yourself, that is going to be the bookend of the city centre, really, where the stadium is, and Everton are going to try to work back towards the city. So a huge opportunity for development and redevelopment around that stadium.
Yeah, and I think American ownerships, there's the yin and the yang, I would say. There's good and bad with it. They will put money in because they're trying to grow this entity that they've invested in, and they think the best way to do it is to transform Everton into a major European club, and that will grow the size of their investment. Part of that will also be, talking to the folks at the Winslow, it seems like the new stadium's plan is to try and keep the fans on campus, on the stadium grounds, more so than would have been the case at Goodison with all these on-campus bars and everything going on there. And I think that will be more of an American mentality where they're like, let's get these folks in the stadium. We'll get some concessions out of them. There is a bit of that, but it is the opportunity, as I wrote in the article, for Everton to host major European finals. And it's a way for them to host Beyonce when she comes to town. It's potentially transformative. Yeah.
And then it is, it's exciting times. Obviously, Everton, they've announced the Ashes, the Ashes, the England-Australia rugby is going to be held there. The Euros are obviously being held at the new stadium in 2028 as well. So a lot of these big events coming that way. The Friedkin Group will obviously trying to redevelop it and trying to make Everton a bigger European club, like you said, a big club in Europe. Roma, who you've just done a bit on, are obviously, they're on I think it's an 18-match unbeaten run or something at the moment. They're flying just beat Inter at the weekend as well, and the Freaking Group, of course, own them as well. So, what's your piece on Roma for? What are you looking at there? Is it the American connection? Is it to do with Everton, or is it something totally different?
So I actually lived in Rome for 5 or 6 months when I was in university. So I have a soft spot, and I went to the Stadio Olimpico, and it was a crazy scene even back then. But I've always been sort of, I find a romance in that city, and I'm a bit of a Roma fan, and it's been fascinating to watch what's happened to them this season. Talking to Alistair McKenzie, who's on the ground there, he's a journalist who lives in Rome. He said that in the beginning of the Friedkins' tenure there, they were considered pretty low-key owners. And it was sort of as you were, Yeah, they had Mourinho. Eventually, it always flames out with Mourinho. They brought in Daniele De Rossi, which seemed like a very savvy move. But when they fired De Rossi, apparently it was bedlam in Rome. And they had totally misread the dynamics of the fan base, how he's a son of Roma. You can't just fire him and expect nothing to happen. They've basically weathered that. They had another interim coach. Well, he ended up being interim because he was there for so little time. Yeah. But they figured out that they needed to bring in Claudio Ranieri to steady the ship in much the way that they then did with David Moyes, to be honest. And this has become a truly romantic football story with Claudio Ranieri coming out of retirement for the second time in a year, basically, to lead his hometown club to, as you said, this amazing run where they're in a very good position to play Champions League football next season. So I think it's worked out well for Everton in that Roma were almost, the training wheels on the bike, we would say in America, that it was sort of a way for them to learn not just how to run a club, but also that these supporters are not like American supporters. No. Even if American supporters are committed, it is, Roma, it's religious, it's really a devout thing. And I think it'll ultimately prove to Everton's benefit that now the Friedkins will find the stability, but also the right moves to make, I think, having gone through all of this. But of course, time will tell. It's no easy feat competing at the level that Everton want to compete at.
No, absolutely. And then finally then, to finish, Jack, I mean, 2 questions really. One, are you going to try and get back over to the new stadium once Everton are in there to witness what that's like? Because it's been designed to try to feel as though it's right on top of the pitch the way Goodison is. So it'll be interesting for you to contrast. I mean, we'll all be doing it, but interesting for you, who's not there every week, to sort of to contrast it. And secondly, having been to Goodison Park and witnessed it then and felt it and smelt it and everything else that you do, the history of the place, is it sad that the Premier League and clubs in general are losing grounds like that we have to, simply because the way football's gone? And what will you miss about it?
I would love to go to the new stadium because, as you say, I've seen those photos. I mean, some of those photos it's a bit treacherous on the stands.
Yeah. I think it's camera tricks, some of them, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It could be. But I would love to see it because, as you say, they did put a lot of thought and care into not becoming one of these major new stadiums where you're very removed from the pitch and it kills atmosphere. So that I would love to compare and contrast, as you say. But I do think that there's something to be lost. It is the Yankee Stadium thing that I motioned at earlier, that you can just feel the history of the place. You feel the magic of all the footsteps that have gone where you are, and all the generations of people that have sung these songs together in this space. But you have to go, I guess, if that's what you want. I've been to Selhurst Park, and Crystal Palace will sometimes talk about a new stadium. They have some American owners with ambition. Yeah. But I don't is it the right thing for Crystal Palace to move out of that grid in Croydon where they are, and you walk by the row houses on the way, and that's South London. That is what Crystal Palace are. I think Everton, it's a bit easier because they're just a much bigger club, and this is what they feel they need to do. But I do think there's something to be lost. I think any football romantic, as I mentioned John Champion earlier, he's a commentator for ESPN and NBC here. he seemed legitimately crushed that he couldn't go to the very particular commentary gantry at Goodison after this season. There's nothing like it. I call the ground idiosyncratic. That commentary gantry certainly is. And
terrifying.
Yeah. But it's because the ground was built piecemeal, and it was first built before there was even radio. It's just an amazing historical artifact, but it's there in physical form. So it makes me sad, but it's also, I guess, the world. It's always been the world, hasn't it? That everything is always changing.
Nothing stays the same, Jack, as they say. Nothing stays the same. And obviously, just a little link between the two clubs. Dan Meese, who's obviously a US architect, also designed Roma's new ground. I mean, they haven't been able to get permission to build it, but designed Roma's new stadium all those years ago. That hasn't come to fruition yet. But another link, I guess, between those two football clubs as well, and the Freaking Group, of course, as well. So very interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. Jack, listen, thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat with me. Absolutely brilliant. Made up that you came over and got to experience Goodison at its finest. Got to see Everton score 3 goals. I mean, come on. And celebrated in the Gladys Street before getting into the Winslow. You even went into St. Luke's. You've had the full Everton experience, and I'm absolutely delighted that you had that opportunity to. And
it was absolutely the full Everton experience, because they attempted to throw the lead away.
Exactly. Even got to see us biting our nails in injury time of a game that we should have been out of sight by the time Tottenham made it 3-1. But that is the full Everton experience. Where can people catch you then, Jack? Where can they listen to your podcast, your show?
So we're over at thefootballweekend.com, and it's also on all the Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're poised to roll out some YouTube presence, but we're not quite there yet. So I would say thefootballweekend.com, you'll get it in your inbox every Friday if you sign up. And it's a big match preview. We'll do some history. We'll do some rivalry. Should be some fun.
Brilliant. Make sure you check out Jack there. Nice one, Jack. Thanks for joining me. Take it easy. See you later.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.